The gentleman from New Jersey is now recognized for his amendment.
Amendment at the desk.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3795, offered by Mr. Garrett of New Jersey.
And I seek unanimous consent to as considered as read.
Gentleman is recognized for unanimous consent is granted. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. After a number of hours here this morning and now this afternoon, I know in getting emails and otherwise, people say that what we're doing here is quite confusing, both the underlying legislation and a number of the amendments as well. And maybe that's so because it's complicated material, and it's so also because a lot of it just only came to us in the last couple of days. But in the bigger sense, what we're trying to do with the Republican substitute is to target the areas where there were problems and get to what the American public wants us to do in a way where they realize that we really don't need more big government overreach and big government solutions when targeted reforms are more appropriate and more effective. When you think about the draft legislation in response to our recent financial crisis, derivatives, we have to ask the question that I keep on asking ourselves over again: what problem is it that we're actually trying to solve? And I think we always hear the fact that the legislation goes broader than what some of the problem areas have been. The vast majority of OTC derivatives marketplace had absolutely nothing to do with the crisis and provides critically important risk management tools for virtually all large companies. AIG, as you just mentioned, was one of the areas that makes the stories in the press. But, you know, the AIG situation wasn't the derivative problem. It was really more of a failed people making bad bets on the housing market and failed government regulation. So what do we need to do in order to address these things? Target it in, focus on the areas. Don't set bank-like capital and margin requirements on the vast majority of participants in the OTC market when they were not at fault, and they posed then and now nothing even approaching systemic risk. Because when you think about it, imposing such a regime will do a number of things. If you pass the majority's bill, it'll be too expensive. It'll hurt end users who want to try to hedge their risk. It'll increase greater volatility in various segments of our economy, like food prices and energy prices. It will result in a loss of capital investments in new projects, and ultimately, as Mr. Hensling said, the loss of jobs as well. All in an economy, as he pointed out before, that had been bleeding jobs for months. So before us is the Republican substitute, and it does a number of things. It targets approach. It goes actual problems, not just systemic large ones and where we don't need to approach them. And it does it in 3 or 4 ways. A main point of the Republican alternative is found in the chairman's bill, and that is a trade repository for all OTC trades, and that they would have to be filed there and reported. What will that do? That will provide the transparency, which I think we are all trying to do. What else will that do? That will provide the regulators the ability to get that data, analyze that data, aggregate that data, and see how the broader marketplace is working. And well, on the other hand, we don't set up a whole new regulatory regime over many market participants because, quite frankly, we don't presume, without any other data that's ever heard, that these entities need to be micromanaged by a new regulatory regime. We do require that the regulators review that data, regularly report back to Congress if they find that an entity already that's been regulated by a prudential regulator should be more heavily regulated due to its size or the activities of the OTC market. In other words, we're going to go out there, capture that information, and have regulators look at it to make sure that a systemic problem is not occurring, and if it does, they will report back to Congress. Additionally, the Republican substitute does not have broad requirements for mandatory clearing, but what does it do? It codifies the commitments that have already been made by the private sector. You know, all the time that Congress debates all this, the private sector has already on its own moved in the right direction, working responsibly and cooperatively with their regulators and appropriate prudential regulators as well to engage in even greater clearing than we've ever seen before. So we simply say that's the right direction to encourage, and they've already made commitments in those areas. Let's codify that. What else do? We require margin requirements between dealers and major market participants, which addresses, I think, the major issue with the AIG-related problems that the chairman just raised before. What else do? Well, with regards to capital requirements, the prudential regulators are required under our bill to take the swaps activities of supervised entities into account when setting capital requirements for those entities. But again, it's not appropriate to set bank-like capital requirements for these non-financial institutions because, again, back to my beginning point, they were not the problem, and it's in the other areas where we need to focus on. Finally and lastly, as I see my time is about to come out, we
The
generally...
gentleman has 2 additional minutes if he needs it.
Okay. I'm almost done. Thank you, though. Finally, we agree with the chairman in regards to segregating margin for OTC swaps. Although we exempt variation margining from segregation requirements based on input from both the buy and the sell side, when you think about it, margin really should be treated as such, especially if the dealer's counterparty wishes it to be. And it should not be commingled with other dealers' funds. You know, many of the problems associated with the Lehman bankruptcy are related to this issue. And so requiring margin segregation, we believe, is an appropriate response to this issue. So in conclusion, it is quite complicated and it is quite confusing, but at the end of the day, the Republican substitute tries to address the major problems that we have seen, and the data supports it, whether it's the AIG situation, whether it's the Lehman situation, whether it's transparency. All of these are captured in the Republican substitute in a manner that will not harm end users, that will not create more volatility, in a manner that will not depress the economy, that will not put additional requirements and burdens on businesses, big or small alike. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.